Hello, everyone, and welcome to this morning's edition of Ramola D Reports. I'm Ramola D, and I'm here this morning with another journalist, a former journalist, Jane Celia Hatch from the Northeast, who's currently in New Mexico, who's here to tell us an extraordinary story, both about her work as a journalist and about subsequent unfortunate consequences that she faced in terms of retaliation and targeting, a story that many have been reporting in recent times. Um, Jane Celia Hatch has a very interesting background. Not merely does she have education and training in journalism, she's also a shamanic healer with a degree in shamanism from an accredited American university, and she says perhaps she's the only one on the continent to have this particular qualification. And this is Lesley University from Cambridge, where I'm very close to. So interestingly enough, it must have been an independent study, and I'm sure we can hear more about that from her. So in addition to her shamanic work, she's also a screenplay writer, and she's been investigating some very high-profile targets, Princess Diana and Michael Jackson. And I understand she's writing creatively about these subjects. So welcome, Jane. I'm so happy to have you with me this morning.
Thank you, Ramola. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you. You're very welcome. There's so much in your background that we can start with. I mean, clearly your degree, if you wanted to, you were just showing me your degree. Did you want to show the audience that? Was it Lesley University?
Oh yeah, I was, because it's shamanism, but it's also a Master of Arts. And I had a focus in, I don't know if anyone can see this, but I had
off camera a little bit. You may want to move it. There we go. Yeah, we go. Okay. We're seeing.
Yeah. Well, it was a focus in alternative healing and shamanism, and the professors that I had also to be shamans. So it was a very unique staff that oversaw my thesis and my writing and my work. It's a very unique degree. I do want to say that's not what qualifies you as a shaman. It was an academic study of the history of shamanism and shamanism all over the earth, that had its origins about 60,000 years ago, according to archaeological evidence. But it's really your relationship with your spirit guides and your power animals, and it's an inner world. So it was part of my training, and it's a unique part.
It sounds absolutely fascinating. Very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people find that very, very interesting. It's wonderful to know that it's being taught, in a university, and that someone can actually take classes or study and research and, get accredited in that subject.
There are shamanic practitioners, shamanic healers teaching worldwide right now. Sandra Ingerman is one of them. It is being taught, and it's a lot of medical professionals are now, and mental health professionals are now incorporating shamanism because they found a limitation with Western medicine and pharmaceuticals, and they're expanding to include the intuitive, and they've just become limited. And one of my mentors, Ann Drake, who's a psychotherapist in Boston now, I think, that was her reason. She was a medical professional, a psychiatrist or psychologist, and she decided it was limiting. It was too limiting. So she went on and she became trained as a shaman. And there's many people doing that now.
That's fabulous.
And I'm very grateful.
Wonderful. I think I should tell our viewers, I think it's perfectly obvious to people who are watching this probably. We're suffering from a little bit of audio and video delay, so we're going to try to work as best as we can around this problem. But pardon us if we appear to be talking over each other at certain points, and I'm sure neither of us intend to do that. So I just wanted to say that's wonderful. I'm so glad that is the case. And, I hope it stays that way. I hope that the field continues to expand, given we're also living in a time period when there is so much repression going on. Holistic healers have been mowed down, unfortunately. And I understand in the UK, the National Health Service has come down on people who are practicing alternative forms of medicine. homeopathy, etc. And over here, there is a move by the FDA to come down on people who are practicing herbalism and naturopathy. So these are things clearly that we as humanity need to, speak out and stand up and protest and fight about and challenge, because otherwise our world as we know it is going to change dramatically. And none of us want that, I'm sure.
Yeah, in my case, which we're going to talk about soon, of gang stalking and FBI targeting, as you know, they can collaborate with psychotherapists and therapists for a mutual aim. And I had several that collaborated, but the one that had shamanic training, the psychotherapist, because she was so in touch with her intuition, she could see through them clearly. And she presented a 20-page document supporting me and saying this, what's going on here is absolutely wrong. So for all of us, it's going to be a benefit if therapists can expand beyond the cognitive and embrace the intuitive, because sometimes that's the only way you can identify a perpetrator or a bad situation. So
absolutely.
That was one of.
And actually, what you're presenting right now, I think, may be news to a lot of people, that the FBI is working with people's psychotherapists in order to change their treatment. What on earth? That sounds absolutely shocking to me. Why on earth would a surveillance agency, an investigative agency, be permitted to work with one's medical doctors, physicians, and therapists?
It's a very good question, and part of my knowledge comes from my own experience, but it's also from watching your reports and all the information online. And also Dr. Catherine Horton surmises it very well, that every system at this point is being run by psychopaths, every major system. And she said, according to her analysis, system analysis, that's a fact. And psychotherapists go to the top because they lack empathy. They will walk over anyone to get to the top. And so then there's this circle of camaraderie, I think, between the leaders of the, whether it's the FBI or the medical, and, Millicent, that's another example, who's on your techno fighters. And it's just example after example of how the medical and the psychiatric field and the deep state, the cabal, or whatever you want to call it, are working in collaboration. I absolutely believe it. I've experienced it, and certainly you have seen it, Ramola, yourself.
Yes, and I've seen different, versions of that, really. But in terms of actual involvement, I mean, that's another issue to investigate. And, we'll get into the subject later on. Perhaps where we should go at this point in time, Jane, is to start with your journalism, because you started off as a wonderful investigative journalist. You were doing kind of local, hardcore feature journalism and investigative journalism. You were investigating a particular DoD contractor, a U.S. Navy contractor, right? Bath Iron Works, and some of the stories that were coming out of people in the community living around that area. So can you talk a little bit more about that precisely? What exactly were you beginning to uncover?
Well, Bath Iron Works is the largest private employer in the state of Maine, and I lived right down the street from them, and I was a reporter for, at that time, it was the Kennebec Journal. And they had pretty much given me free reign to cover whatever topics I want. I started with soft news, and then I think it was early 90s, I went into hard news, and I jumped in, I believe it was with Berrigan, the peace activist, and he was
Father
a priest.
Berrigan, yes, yeah.
Yeah, they had Easter morning, I think it was 1991, they'd cut with wire cutters into Bath Iron Works and spilled, I think it was goat blood or something, onto the system of it was either the Arleigh Burke or another destroyer. And at that point, I got very interested in what was going on at Bath Iron Works, and I asked my editor if I could cover, and they did. So I covered Berrigan, and I was very naive. I thought that it was great to be uncovering the truth. I was a young, enthusiastic, I was a single mom. I needed this job, and I was excited. And then I gave, the pivotal point was I really gave fair coverage to Berrigan. And this is in a town that a lot of people depend on the yard. It's one of the largest contractors for the U.S. Navy. And I just didn't realize what I was getting into. And then activists started coming to me because I was a reporter that, you know, gave fair coverage. So at that point, a woman, Linda Noble, came to me, and she was being sexually harassed horribly. I also, in retrospect, realized she was being gang stalked. It was horrible. She was being run off the road at night. Her chair at work was being dismantled. She'd find used condoms on her desk, and it just went on and on and on. And now I see it was gang stalking as well. Right then, it was sexual harassment. And there was another woman, Jane Smith, and they've been public with this, so I can use their names. There was an effigy hung of her from the shipyard crane, a naked effigy of her, because she had filed a sexual harassment suit. So I jumped into that with both feet, and I think I met with the president. I can't remember. I met with an official, and I did a 3-part expose on sexual harassment at Bath Iron Works. And it also involved racism. That was my dog. Hi. So that was the second big story. Then there was activists at that time, Ray Shaddis and Chuck Hagan, who were trying to shut down Maine Yankee. So I also got involved in that. And I was writing about, and again, giving fair coverage to the protesters. And that got published. She kept publishing. So I was on a roll with exposés.
Wonderful.
The only one I didn't hit directly was the Brunswick Naval Air Station, which was also there. And then, so then I covered Tar Box Hill. Bath Iron Works, they had these workers called grinders. In the middle of the night, they would be grinding paint off the side of the ship.
Oh, wow.
And there was a very strange thing, because why would well, apparently by the time they got done, the beginning had rusted, so they were grinding and painting, and it covered South Bath with like this black film.
Oh,
and I found it on my car one day. I had a silver car. I was like, what? And my daughters were getting lung problems, and I was too. And I was, what is this? And I found out it's something that was called Black Beauty, and it covered. I mean, it basically covered the residents of the. And so I did an expose on that, and discovered there was an area in Bath called Tar Box Hill, and women who had been pregnant, who had birth defects in their babies. And so that was like the third expose. So I was getting in deep, still completely naive that anything. And at that point, the girl who had come to me, Linda Noble, I had tapes and tapes of her life, and I started listening to them one night, and they came to me in scenes, and they weren't all awful scenes. They were scenes of her being in the ocean in Maine, and her great-grandmother who was Native American. And I realized I was seeing things in scenes, and I started to write a screenplay.
Wait a minute. Were you reading her story and sort of gaining physical images from her story, or are you speaking about some kind of psychic awareness at this point?
No, this is real. This is her real story that I wrote about for the expose. Okay. But we had taped it. And so I was re-listening, and instead of seeing words, I was seeing images. So I decided to write a screenplay about her life. And she was the first electrical engineer, female, at Bath Iron Works. So she went through hell to get that position, and then while she was in that position. So it's basically the true story of the first female electrical engineer at Bath Iron Works.
Wow. Sounds fascinating. Sounds really, really interesting. And horrifying at the same time, but she was, targeted in this way.
Yeah, so this is a very interesting turn of events. I didn't know that anyone outside myself and a few of my close friends, and I had a lot of friends in Bath at the time, knew that I was writing this screenplay. And of course, Linda Noble knew I was writing this screenplay. Well, within that screenplay was dialogue that was maybe the most implicating, if that's a word, piece of information. And this is probably why she was also gang stalked, is she had witnessed them using faulty parts in the Arleigh Burke destroyer, parts that had caused serious injury at Ringgold shipyard. They already knew these parts, but there's a thing about Navy contractors, they want to be first, they want to get everything out so they get another contract. So they were getting these parts quickly. So I wasn't even thinking about this dialogue, I was thinking about the gang stalking. But somehow I believe the president of Bath Iron Works found out the contents. I don't know how. Because back then you weren't online. There was what was in my word processor and who I told. So it was around that time that the president of Bath Iron Works came up to me at a yard sale in Bath. And he said, Jane, how's the screenplay coming along? And I was shocked. I don't even remember what I said. I probably said good. And then he gave me a kind of a strange look and he walked away. And at that point, I realized that maybe I was in some kind of trouble. And I was at that point. The next thing I knew, someone had driven by my door and shot it with a gun. And I had 2 young daughters, so something was up.
Shot at your door? Like left marks on the door?
Yeah, like a bullet.
Oh my gosh.
So I was waking up a little bit from my naivete. I was kind of a Pollyanna. Like everything was, about flowers and, I was just kind of, maybe it was my Christian Science upbringing. I don't know. I was just all about, the truth and love. And I thought that was a good thing back then.
Of course.
So, yeah. So things got very, very, very bad after that and stayed that way for 10 years.
So I know you've written about this recently, Jane, and in fact you noted in this recent blog post that you've made, which perhaps you can link for viewers at the end of the video, and we can stick the link below, so people can read what you've written. You wrote that you had actually been watching the Techno Crime Fighter Forum podcasts, and you'd been somewhat inspired to put your own story out, which I'm very moved to hear, really.
Absolutely. It was you. I think I came across Dr. Catherine Horton first, and I was absolutely mesmerized. I was making a connection to my own life. It was mesmerizing, so I kept watching her videos, and then you and Karen Stewart, and I was like, this is the final piece to my puzzle. This is what happened to me. This is what's still happening to me. And when you become a target, things start happening so fast and you're so overwhelmed, you don't know what's happening. And sometimes, unless now we have targets now have something to go to and say, okay, that is happening to me. I wasn't even shielding myself until I saw Dr. Horton.
Mm-hmm.
And because she was so intelligent, and I could relate to her, and she was so honorable in so many ways. She's not crazy. She is perfectly legitimate. She's highly intelligent. I'm going to do this too. And I was sick a lot before I started shielding. So I really attribute to people, my increasing good health, because I am shielding.
Wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that, because, indeed, that is one of the first things to do when you discover you're being targeted with externally arriving energy, with electromagnetic signals being sent your way from the outside, which you can actually record. At that point, people do start researching shielding, and I'm so glad that you found Dr. Catherine Horton's videos. She's very inspiring, and, the very fact that she's taking a clear stand and speaking out is powerful.
Oh, yeah. All of you, your bravery was, because I come to this point where everything needed to be suppressed in that area. You felt like, but then I got to the point, well, this isn't stopping. And I think you people helped me realize, you're like, this is, I think you even said that this is not going to stop. Or Karen said it, this is not going to stop until they kill you or disable you. So, you know, what do I have to lose? I need to.
That's it. That's, you know, once you realize that's their intention, I think that's the point at which you make the decision, well, I'm sorry, but, you know, I'm going to speak out. And you begin to speak out very strongly. And I think that's what we're all doing. And people need to speak out, because if you do not speak out against abuse of this nature, this extraordinary use of stealth radiation weapons against the populace, then the rest of the populace remains unprotected. You know, so literally we are the frontline reporters reporting this crime.
We're the canaries in the mine.
Absolutely, the canaries in the coal mine. That is an absolutely accurate metaphor in this particular case. So, you know, I'm very glad you've stepped forward. And perhaps you can tell us a little bit about what exactly happened. So you're saying that, you know, it certainly sounds like you had some immediate repercussions land at your doorstep. You know, the shots fired at your door. And I understand from the story that you've written that your family was targeted. In a sense, you endured a lot of family chaos and mayhem over several years, your children kind of being parted from you and fighting for not exactly legal custody, but it seems like actual physical presence, time to be with them, etc. So did you want to touch on that a little bit? What exactly are some of the things that started to happen over those years?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very, very hard subject, but I have already talked about it. So anything that, you know, involves my daughters is hard. And and I did not make the connection to gang stalking until recently. I thought that it was centered around a couple of people that in retrospect, or even then, seemed very psychopathic. But I realize now everything that happened couldn't have happened if there wasn't a broader platform. So I can say as briefly as I can, because it was a 10, 15-year situation, whereas my ex-husband and I were getting along very well. We had 2 young daughters, and we shared very well. Things were going well, you know, as best they can under these circumstances. And then he met a woman who, I don't know how to describe her, except for, in the end, she was very psychopathic and immoral and extremely abusive and manipulative. And she moved center into our lives. And immediately after he started dating her, things went downhill extremely fast. She was feeding, and it's so hard to explain how a psychopath works because they're extremely deceptive and manipulative. And people like us, we can barely understand how they can do this. But she basically started to tell him I was jealous of her. I was somehow hurting her. And so it would come back at me, you're jealous of, you have to stop, Jane. And then my daughters would go to visit them, and they would come back filled with, why are we poor, Mom? You know, are you, you know, why don't you take us to the doctor? Which wasn't true. I did, but I also did use alternative. So every little thing. And then eventually my oldest daughter, and there was other abuse going on with the stepmother and my daughters, but a lot of it was mind control. In the sense, she started to traumatize my oldest daughter when it was time for her to come back to be with me. There would be subliminal punishment. There was strange sort of, I would say there was a sexual abuse. There was a case where one of them, the stepmother asked one of my daughters to go outside naked, and she would pay her $50.
What?
So, yeah. So there was I was getting terrified. In the meantime, my oldest daughter was withdrawing from me, and I could see it happening. It was And she had worked my ex-husband so that he didn't believe me or my daughters. He was only believing the stepmother. So then came a guardian ad litem, Victoria Muller, and then came a therapist, and they were all quoting each other and all believing each other, and they were disbelieving anything I said or my daughters. So then I was so afraid of what the step was doing to my daughters. I went to court to try to get primary custody, especially when my ex-husband was out to sea. He was a merchant marine. It made absolutely no sense for them to be with her when he was gone. The situation, it was just like, it was like gang stalking. Everything I said to the guardian was twisted, and it came out as something else in a report. Everything was exactly as the stepmother dictated. I was jealous of her. If you'd read the report was shocking. It reminds me of Millicent and what she went through with her baby, and they sent her. Yeah, the therapists were Melanie. Yeah, it's just very similar. And so you had a therapist saying, I was jealous. The stepmother, everyone was saying all these things that weren't true. And then they went into this report, and then it went to the judge, and the judge, I had an incredible attorney. They ignored everything. I had an amazing psychotherapist I told you about, Dr. Nancy Coleman, who had seen me and seen my daughters, and she laid it out exactly. Was this the stepmother's abusive? She's sexually abusive. She's emotionally abusive. This will devastate these girls. Jane is went on, what a good mom. They ignored her report. They refused to call her doctor. The judge Field refused to see my witnesses. I had friends lined up, ready to testify. He wouldn't see them. And I will never forget what he said. He said, I don't have time for your witnesses. I have a murder case to attend to. And
awful.
So my daughter went through absolute hell for the next 10 years with the stepmother every single day. We're lucky we survived, and I do attribute shamanism to how we survived.
Mm-hmm. Now, unfortunately, you're telling a story that I think many other mothers across America have experienced.
That's what I'm beginning to believe, thanks to you as well. And on and on, I keep hearing these stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly am starting to believe it's tied into sex trafficking in some
It
cases.
is. Unfortunately, it's also tied to the child protection system, which many people are beginning to understand is a child predation system. It is the care system.
Yeah.
It's not just problematic. It feeds into these pedocriminal networks that are being uncovered currently. It's
I don't know. I think they wanted to destroy me. I don't know. It's my bloodline. They certainly wanted to destroy, and we may be talking from the FBI down. I don't know. They may want to, I think they were trying to push me into suicide or murder. I refused to do either because I knew that eventually I would be the only one that had this story to tell my daughters that they weren't crazy. They wouldn't have made it, in the end if I wasn't constantly there. If they had been able to get rid of me, and they already had their father completely under mind control, I don't know what would have happened to my daughters. They were extraordinarily beautiful and intelligent, and it scares me to think of what might have happened if they were able to get rid of me, but they couldn't.
And to just kind of cover a little bit of what you have told me earlier, Jane, it sounds like this whole time period you were struggling you actually went to court and you were struggling to gain primary custody, but throughout this entire time period, you maintained a very close physical presence with your daughters. You made sure that they had some contact with you, right?
I was constantly trying. If I called and they went to the phone, she would find a punishment. My letters were thrown away, my birthday cards. When I went to pick them up, there'd be a note, we're at a party. I did everything humanly possible. And sometimes we would be able to be together, but it just got, and at a certain point, I couldn't see my oldest daughter. She was too scared to come see me. But my youngest kept fighting and fighting, and she's still healing. I mean, she's 33, and she still is healing from that trauma. But I did everything humanly possible to be with them, and they did everything humanly. If I saw my daughter and she had to go to the doctor, they would. I think my ex-husband once said, "If you bring her to the doctor, I'm calling the police." It was beyond what I can even describe to you. I don't know how to describe this level of torture and gang stalking against the mother and children, and we survived, and we're very close. But it's healing. It's constantly healing. Still.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm glad to hear that. You know, you mentioned during your conversation that your ex-husband was kind of mind control throughout this enterprise. And people who are new to this concept of mind control may not know that we are literally speaking about neurotechnology that's being used as a form of remote influence. Is that what you are referring to, or what precisely are you referring to in terms of mind control?
In his case, I don't believe I'm talking about anything neuro. Okay. He was a man who did not grow up with a father and had a very controlling, domineering mother. He had an Irish Catholic mother who controlled every movement. And he went into his adulthood not really knowing how to be a man or a father or hold his ground, and constantly waiting for a woman to tell him what to do. And the stepmother fulfilled that role very well. He could remain the child, and she could dictate. So in that sense, there may have been some other, I don't know what going on. Someone mentioned to me some other, I don't want to go into it, but he was under the complete control of the stepmother. I don't believe there was any, I don't know. I really don't know now that you mention it, but my first thought, he was not under any kind of neuro mind control. He was under the mind. It was his upbringing that left him completely susceptible to being controlled by someone like.
Very interesting. But you know, this whole concept of neuro mind control today is also so very insidious. It has to do with brain entrainment, and it has to do with so subliminally influencing people that it kind of makes them do things a little bit against their natural brain or their natural personality, etc. It's very insidious, and you know, that's a whole subject in itself. But I do understand what you're saying regarding somebody.
I'd actually like to talk to him about that. Like, what, you know, we are slowly healing our relationship, and we have actually had a Thanksgiving and a Christmas together, which is a miracle. It's an absolute miracle, considering, you know, the atrocities. Both my daughter and I feel he was an accomplice to, but in so many ways he seems like a victim. I guess that's the part of us, you know, we're also very compassionate and forgiving. But at some point I'd like to ask him, what was going on in your mind? Why weren't you listening to your daughter? You know, was there something else beyond? And I knew from being married to him, you know, that he was susceptible to controlling women, and I wasn't one of those. So there was a discomfort in our marriage, probably in part because of that. I wasn't controlling, and he didn't know how to be in that kind of relationship. But I'd like to ask about that. He'll probably see this.
You mean neurotechnology? I think we're going to continue to cover neurotech in our Technocrime Fighters podcast, and I'm certainly going to be doing a few info talks about them. And there are other people who are targeted, who are actually, you know, very erudite, very educated, who are beginning to do podcasts of their own and beginning to write articles. So I think we're going to see a lot more information out on this shortly. So stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for that. So one of the things I wanted to ask you was, you mentioned shamanism may have had a part to play in the rescue of your daughters. Now, this might seem highly esoteric to some people, but I think it's also a very intriguing aspect of your own background. So if you wanted to touch on that a little bit, I know you've written about it. If you wanted to talk about that, we have you could. Yeah.
Well, I've written extensively about shamanism in general. In fact, I did a master's thesis on it. So I'm well versed in the academic side of it as well as the intuitive. It is not New Age. It's ancient. It's at least 60,000 years old. So it's nothing to do with anything airy fairy. It's a very deeply researched. Dr. Michael Harner was one of my teachers. Sandra Ingerman, Dr. Ann Drake. There's a lot of people that are very grounded that are embracing shamanism. So there's two major things that a shaman does, and one is to remove intrusions from the spiritual body. And an intrusion is a negative spiritual body. It could be someone shouts at you, and you feel uncomfortable for the rest of the day. You have a spiritual intrusion. It's gone into your energy field.
Yeah.
If a curse is a very expanded form of a spiritual intrusion, and that's what the Satanists do. And the Satanists are very involved with and the military and the FBI. And I often feel Satanism and directed energy weapons go hand in hand. And they're working on different parts of your energy field. So shamanism can actually untie the cords to Satanism if that's part of your gang stalking. So we remove what shouldn't be in your energy field, and even our own thought process can create spirit. If you're always saying I'm ugly, and you're creating actual intrusions in your energy field, which eventually, if you don't clear them, they'll go into your body and it'll start an illness. It all starts with our minds. So to begin with that, I was able to long distance keep removing the intrusions that the stepmother put in my daughters, because it was the only thing I was left with was my spirit to save my daughters. I did it. I was stripped of every other right. They wouldn't even let me take them to the doctors. So I was stripped of everything. I sort of became superhuman because that's all I had left was my spirit. So in shamanism, you learn to send your spirit through the web of life, not your whole spirit. It's called the sub-spirit. And it's a very expansive form of prayer, if prayer's an easier word for people. And you do it, you send your spirit with a lot of support. That could be God, that could be Christ, it could be Mary. And with shamans, we use a lot of power animals. And it's it's a huge subject. You can go to my website and I have a whole thing on power animals. So I would send my sub-spirit with all my allies and helpers to my daughters, and I would heal their energy field. I would pull out all the intrusions that she was putting into them to disable them. Mind manipulation, depression, anxiety. So I was able to continually clear, and myself too. And this was at the time that I started to go to shamans, and they were healing me. So they were doing this for me. I would do it for my daughters.
Wow.
The second primary thing a shaman does, and I'm talking about healing shamans, and my background is core shamanism, which is a very Western version of indigenous shamanism, is we return power that's been taken away. Every time a trauma occurs, there is a chance of what a shaman calls soul loss. A psychotherapist calls the same thing disassociation. You're essentially losing a little piece of yourself, trauma after trauma after trauma. And Sandra Ingerman calls it an intelligent adaptive strategy to extreme duress. And she's an expert in trauma. She has a lot of books out. So we were experiencing soul loss after soul loss. It gets to the point of people and you've seen people, you say they're half there. It's true, they're half there. Because half of their soul has left and they've gone to, other dimensions to survive. So I would bring back our souls every time they were lost. I would travel. And bring it back.
That's amazing. It sounds like hard work as well. It sounds like it required a lot of energy.
It required a lot of energy, but actually it's a very joyful process because you get to leave this dimension where everything horrible is happening, and you get to join the loving and compassionate spirits. So it was actually part of my survival, was just being in that other dimension. Wow. Because it gave me hope. I can leave here, I can leave where everything horrible is happening and be in this magical world. I can't stay there forever because that would become another addiction. So removing the extractions was hard, but soul retrieval is very, very joyful.
Very interesting. So interesting. And you say that well, this is the story that you've actually spelled out in your account. You say that you were able in this form that you are describing, in the shamanic form, you were able to actually, at a certain high point in your daughter's lives, at a certain negative high point, I should say, nadir probably, you were able to enter the moment, see what was happening, and engage in shamanic action to break that spell or whatever was holding them there.
That was a remarkable moment. I didn't know what was going to unfold as it began. It was 10 years after all of this began, and I had not gotten anywhere with getting them out of that house where they were with their stepmother. It was a dead end everywhere I looked. So I had lots of nightmares, and one night I had a particularly horrifying nightmare where I dreamed the house was burning down and they were in it, and they couldn't get out. And of course I woke up terrified, and I'm like, this is it. I have to get them out. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I have to get them out. So I think that dream was given to me by, I didn't know there was things going on with them at that time. I didn't actually know, but I think my spirit guides and my power animals were invigorating me to do what I did next, which was, and this is all shamanic, I called in all of my power animals, all of my spirit guides. God, I called in my spirit guides from past lives, from my, I was in England. I called in all the power I could possibly think of, and I said, we're going into the house. We're gonna get them. I didn't even know what that meant because this was all being done on a spiritual level. So all of us went, and I believe Mary was there, the Virgin Mary, and it's making me cry thinking of this. But so we traveled through the spirit world into the house, and I saw my daughters, and I held their hands, and I said, we're leaving. And this is all happening in spirit, and the other guides were just clearing out all the evil spirits, and Mary was there just bringing love into this house. And so I took their hands, and it's really hard to talk about. And there was a horse that I sometimes rode on as a shaman, so we all got on that, and we flew through the spirit world back to my house. And I was in a trance at that point, and I fell asleep. And I woke up to the phone ringing, and I was still kind of in a trance, and I answered it. To this day, I can't remember who called me, but they said, you have to get the bath, Jane, now. There's something going on with the girls. So I got in my car, and it was, I don't know, 1 in the morning, maybe midnight, and I didn't know what I was driving into. And I was thinking about what I had just done with my spirit guides, and I didn't relate the two events at that point. I didn't know why I was going to Bath, which is where they lived. And I pulled up in my car, and there was lights flashing, and there was police cars, and there was all kinds of people. And I saw my youngest daughter in the backseat of a police car, and I got in my, I parked my car, and I just went to her first. And I got into the backseat of the police car, and I looked at her, and I held my hand like I had done in the journey, and we were holding hands for real. And she was crying, and I said, it's okay, it's going to be okay. And there was just, it seemed like 24 teenagers and police cars. And I said, where's my other daughter? And she said, she's run, she's gone, she's escaped.
Oh, wow.
So I still wasn't relating. So what had happened was the stepmother and my husband had gone away to Disneyland. By then they had 3 little boys, and they had left the girls alone. The girls had had this huge party where everyone got drunk. smash the windows. Everything my guides had done was being done on the physical. Doors open, windows smashed. And the teenagers, as strange as this sounds, had rocked a police car chanting, "Set the girls free, set the girls free." So I still wasn't relating it. I was so much had happened. So not eventually, that was the end. They never went back to that house. They were freed. My lawyer went in and got full custody back almost immediately, because he said, you know, these people have thrown the kids out of the house. Because when my husband got back, they charged the girls with all these crimes and threw them out of the house. And so my lawyer went in and said, yeah. So there was no question. It was a different.
Oh, wow.
Judge. So I became the full-time custodian, but as I said in my story, they belonged to no one at that point. They were afraid, they were scared, they had been traumatized. The healing began, and the stepmother kind of pretty much lost control at that point of the trauma, and so did my ex. And the healing began. I didn't tie the shamanic event and that event. It was actually quite a while until I thought, as above, so below. So what we did on the spirit level manifested almost immediately. And it's not always the way you think it's going to be, but it manifested. That was the end. And so it's just been, what, 20 years now of healing. We're still healing. I'm just beginning to figure out that I'm still being targeted. Nothing they could do to me will ever compare to that. There's nothing like your children. They know that.
I know.
So whatever they do is, you know.
That is an absolutely extraordinary story, Jane. That's just incredible. And I'm so glad you were able to speak about that. And as you say, it sounds like such an intense event that there's no comparison with anything else. And I'm so glad that it ended well for you and for your family, and the girls were returned to you.
It did. It did not end the way they wanted it to. It's hard for me to say it ended well. I lost my little girls.
Yeah.
For the most part, I lost them.
Over the long period of time.
Yeah. A little, you know, the experience you have, those were all gone. They kept me out of graduations, birth, everything.
Oh,
they
no.
kept me out.
Oh.
Yeah, no matter what I did, they kept me out somehow. So I lost my little girls. I do have my daughters, and I do believe they were saved. They're very highly educated. Mm-hmm. They're very powerful.
Wonderful.
People sense that they're truth tellers. That's what they did not want my bloodline to do, was to continue to tell the truth. That's why they wanted to destroy my bloodline, I believe.
So you feel you've been targeted for your bloodline in a sense?
Well, to a certain degree, because when I look back at my life, I never caught a break from 7 years on and up. It was constant. I had a half brother who I believe headed up a disinformation campaign about me. And I don't know how that ties into, you know, gang stalking and all these other, but my mother and I were separated almost the same age, my daughters and I. And I did everything in my intellectual mind to avoid that, because I was terrified what was going to happen to her, what happened to me. So I did everything the opposite, and it still happened. So it went back to when I was 7 years old. My mother went through a similar experience, which is extraordinary. How does that happen generation after, if there's not something bigger going on? And certainly, you know, I write about the Hatches, you know, the Hatch coat of arms right there is safer with hope than with arms. So in a sense, we're pacifists to be, you know, historically. That's about being creative, being loving, being, you know, there's lots of writers and poets and healers. There's a line of mystics. And so when I think of that creed and you know, that it is whistleblowers and activists that are targeted, you know, and you got to you start putting a big puzzle together, and it's very possible I was targeted at birth, and that they somehow, an alarm somehow goes off when some of us are born, and they keep an eye on us and make life extremely difficult.
Yes,
And
there's
they do that with,
a lot of people who have experienced, that kind of traumatizing at a very young age have been speaking out about it, about MK Ultra and Monarch programs being inflicted on them at an early age, and that this has been happening generationally. I mean, there are so many stories, so many people coming out and speaking about this now. And
again,
as you said,
again,
the occultists and the Satanists in these dark agencies are certainly seemingly implicated in all of this.
yeah, I believe that Satanism was alive and strong in Bath, Maine during the time that my custody and my whole gang stalking was going on. And I actually, before I went into hard news and started doing the exposés on Bath Ironworks, I was covering soft news, and I would cover, writers and healers, and I interviewed, psychics and other people like that, and eventually became friends with them. And they were really the ones that helped me, with the spiritual people in Bath. A lot of other people abandoned me, and one of them told me that, there is a group of Satanists in this town, Jane, and I think they are contributing to your demise. She said, I know where they meet. There's a lot of us that are going up there and trying to clear the energy, but I want you to know, I think that they're participating in what's happening to you. And I was still having a very hard time, except I was in my 30s, and I had grown up a Christian Scientist, which believes that love is the only true force in the world. And I was still, everything in my life had pointed to that wasn't true, but there was a part of me that still had this very pure, like, love is everything. And I didn't accept it then. But then there was this murder in Bath, unexplained, of a very young girl. She was 13 years old, Sarah Cherry. And it was happening around the same time as my custody battle. And this young guy, this farmer, organic farmer, no criminal history, nothing, was implicated in her death and put in jail for 2 life sentences. Everyone knew he was innocent. They would not accept DNA.
Wow.
And I believe that Sarah Cherry was sacrificed in Bath at that time. So Satanism is alive and well, I unfortunately, and I believe it goes parallel. And a lot, I'm going to start a YouTube series. We're going to help targets and other people that's interested in how to protect, not just with the directed energy, but of the satanic work that can be going on at the same time. And that is something that you can extract from your energy field, protect from. So that's one thing I'm going to be doing.
Wonderful. That sounds absolutely fabulous. It sounds like you're so well equipped for that. You have your psychic gifts as well as your shamanic training, and that's wonderful. I think a lot of people will be very, very grateful for that. Well, I'm kind of looking at the time, Jane. We're kind of coming to the end of the hour. So this has been such a fascinating story, and I'm so glad that you've been able to take us through the arc of how the shamanic healing really worked in your family's case, etc.
Thank you for asking about it. It is important.
Yes, absolutely. We've spent less time on the directed energy weapon.
Yeah, we haven't even covered that. I do have up, my protection.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we all have that in our homes to deflect
we didn't get
those energy.
But, we covered a lot.
We did. Did you want to talk a little bit about that? We have a few minutes left. Did you want to talk about what some of the most extraordinary aspects of that have been?
Yeah, that began, I believe, in the early 90s in Bath as well, when I would I was constantly trying to get back into town for my daughters, and I thought it was a satanic attack, but because that was my knowledge base, was what happened on the spiritual level. I was like, this doesn't feel like it. And I tried to get a job, I would get these attacks, and I didn't know what they were. I go to look at a house, it was like they were clearly monitoring me. I don't know if I was chipped back then or not, but I believe, in retrospect, they were coming from Brunswick Naval Air Station, which is only 14 miles, and they were trained in surveillance because of Bosnia. I didn't, this was the furthest thing in my mind 20 years ago. I had no concept. The number one thing we all think is, not me. Why me? I'm not that important. They wouldn't, but they have millions and millions of dollars for this. And I was a young, attractive woman. I was a whistleblower. Like I said, I was the perfect storm. So that's when it started. I went to Cape Cod. I had about a year of relief. And then I went to Santa Fe and started writing about Michael Jackson, and it started again. But it was more like gang stalking then. And then I was gang stalked to the point where I lost my home. I didn't have, this was just a few years ago, 5 years ago. I was completely destabilized again. Went to North Carolina, it stopped. I got back here. I was ready to go to England to research Diana. And I was getting dew, and I didn't know it then, but every time I go to sleep, I would get this electric shock. And I honestly, I thought it was, well, there's a million things you could think it is. You know, it's the Wi-Fi, it's the smart meter, it's Candida even, you know, it's again, it wasn't until I started seeing other people talking and I was having the exact same symptoms. So it starts up when I'm on a roll, on uncovering a story. And I've got voice to skull, which is really interesting for a shaman. But it's not that bad. I mean, being a shaman, I can tune into more joyful levels. It's very distinct. They try with me to voice the skull, but they fail. I shouldn't say that, but it's true. So I've experienced a little bit of everything. And last night, they gave me a break for some reason, but it doesn't make me feel secure. It makes me wonder what they're doing next. Mm-hmm. But mostly it's, I'm getting, you know, hit all night. I have about 10 layers of protection. I've got organite and, you know, again, I thank all of you because I'm now protecting myself. I was sick a lot the last 2 years. I kept saying to my daughters, why am I sick? I'm an herbalist. I'm a certified herbalist as well. I'm a vegetarian. I dance. I have a lot of joy in my life. Like, why? And I figured it out because of you guys, mostly.
Oh, I'm so glad. You know, it's just, I should mention to those viewers who are perhaps hearing about these subjects for the first time that unfortunately many people around the country and around the world are reporting precisely this, being accessed, their human bodies being accessed remotely with electromagnetic signals, experiencing things like remote electrical shock, remote electrocution almost, all sorts of, you know, symptoms that are very much related to the play of tracking radar, military tracking radar, or surveillance through wall radar on the human body. So the equipment that's being used by our law enforcement and by the military that's being tested in weapons testing contracts around the country are indeed producing the kinds of symptoms that people are reporting. So, you know, this is a case of adding two and two together and understanding that what's going on is a massive amount of non-consensual human experimentation with these directed energy weapons around the country. They're called anti-personnel electromagnetic technologies in law enforcement, I believe. And the military has a lot of choice euphemisms for them, like non-lethal weapons, electronic weapons, psychotronic weapons, etc.
Yeah. Is it targeted justice has now deduced that Travis Air Force Base in Arizona may be the source of most of it.
Well, that's right. That's right. And I spoke to Richard Lighthouse, the NASA engineer at Targeted Justice.
Yeah, that's where I learned it.
Yeah. Oh, you did. Okay. And he talked about how he thinks these are satellite weapons. These are high pulse microwave weapons that are being carried on satellites and, you know, are connected with this U.S. Air Force base and the U.S. Air Force Space Command, etc. But we also talked about other modalities, other different kinds of weapons that are being tested, and other modalities, you know, cell tower weapons. Everything's been weaponized at this point, right? And you can use kill off of any antenna. So.
Yeah, 5G, we're all going to be targets. I mean, this is nothing. We're all targeted now. Smart meters and Wi-Fi, and you know, if you think you're immune to this, you know, just step out of line once. go to a meeting and say the wrong thing, defend your child against, whatever the agenda at the time is. And you can get on the list. This is about all of us, every single one of us right now.
And all of it is illegal, illegitimate, extrajudicial, unconstitutional, wrongful,
Yes.
and very, very wrong. And this is why it's amoral and immoral as well. And this is why, we need to speak out continuously and consistently about it. Because it's outrageous that weapons can be used against anybody, but because they are stealth weapons, they have been put into place. And the electronic control grid that permits this kind of assault has been put into place. So I'm glad you made that point, that everybody, in a sense, is being targeted. Everybody is susceptible. And once 5G rolls out, if humanity permits that rollout, because I do still think,
exactly.
You know what I mean? I personally think there's still a chance that all of us speaking out can begin to make a difference, and stop it from rolling out. Because seriously, it shouldn't be rolled out, because it's like some kind of massive kill grid that they are attempting to put into place with 5G.
Yeah, it's not one step up from 4G as some people think. It's a huge, it's a leap.
It's a quantum leap.
Different.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So, Jane, thank you so much for being with me this morning. I'd love to, put the information out for viewers as to where they can get a hold of your articles, your website, your podcast. Did you want to talk a little bit about where people can go to find you online?
Yeah, you can go to my website, BethesdaStar.com, BETHESDA. Star.com, and I also have upcoming workshops, a webinar. I'm going to start sacred tours. The first one's going to be in Glastonbury, England. I'm trying to essentially maybe do clear energy fields like I did with my daughters above places that may have very low or very destructive energies. We can work on the spiritual level. So I'm going to train people to do what I do. And that's on my website. I'm starting a YouTube series, and I'm going to call it Targeted Shaman. And it's going to be about targeting to bring in good energy, but also to help target with the satanic part of what's going on. Because Satanism can put you in the wrong place at the wrong time. They're working on your energy field. And it's just as important to protect against that as it is for the directed energy. So that's my YouTube. You just go, I don't know my URL is yet, but you can go under Targeted Shaman. And then Twitter, Shaman Tweet. I'm on Facebook, Shamanic Healing with Jane Hatch.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And if you wanted to send me all of that in an email, I'll just stick the links below.
Okay.
Well, and, so definitely, I hope people will check out your wonderful podcast when you have them ready, and, join you on your tours, on your physical tours to Glastonbury and so on. Sounds fascinating. So I'm so glad I had a chance to visit with you this morning.
Thank you so much, Ramola, to all of you. You've been very important in my life and my healing.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, we are blessed to be able to meet so many wonderful people around the world, through this meeting.
Wonderful people.
Really. Yes, absolutely. And, we are working together. We are standing together as we are speaking out and trying to bring change to this very troubled world of ours. So, on that note, thanks so much. Have a great morning, and we'll speak soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.